Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Everybody hear me online? Oh, are they all muted?
Yep, you got some thumbs up.
Okay, good, good. I'm Dr. Karim Budhwani, as Molly just introduced me, and I'm really pleased and honored, really, to be here. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for joining us from across the United States to have a discussion about innovation and new knowledge-driven economy, how we can take advantage of it, and why we should be doing this. Because do I see a raised hand? Can they not hear us?
I think you're fine.
Okay.
Ignore the people on the screen.
Okay. Cool. Did we lose this guy? Okay. All right. So, in keeping with the theme or the spirit of the Grand Rounds, I will begin with an overview of how I got here, and then I'll speak about what we are doing today to crush cancer, and then take a look ahead in terms of where we're heading with regards to the economy, society, and so on. But I'm sure that the first thing that I should answer is, why do we have Iron Man here? And since we do have to look back at the past, I will say that when I was growing up, my two favorite superheroes were Superman and Iron Man. And Superman is awesome. Like, who wouldn't want to be Superman, right? You have X-ray vision, you have all these really cool things. The problem is, it's very difficult to relate to Superman. It's very hard to be Superman. Because first of all, you have to be born on Krypton, a planet that just explodes. And then you have to have like super strength and so on. So it's very hard to be Superman, especially if you are a very nerdy, geeky child growing up in India, right? So now, even now, if I were to go back, by the hospital where I was born, change its name to Krypton, I still would have that red sun, yellow sun issue to deal with. So very, very difficult to be Superman. Iron Man, on the other hand, it's very easy to be Iron Man. Anybody can be Iron Man. And thanks to the helmet, you don't have to be super good looking either. Because, and in fact, I speak to everybody who has joined us both online and in person over here. I believe that all of us can be Iron Man, Iron Person, because we are all committed to taking advances in science, technology, engineering, combining it with elements of liberal arts and management to drive both the society and humanity forward. This is our goal. And so, in a sense, we're all Iron Person. I'll come back to this towards the end of the talk as well. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at my past. So as I mentioned earlier, I was born in Bombay, India. It was my brother, my sister, myself, my parents, and my grandmother. We all lived in a little studio efficiency apartment, which was half the size of this room. So my dad often jokes to me that our closets now are larger than our whole apartment was in Bombay. So, but in 1989, I traveled to the United States. I went to Crow College to get my undergrad in computer science. I was very narrow focused on computer science. That's what I wanted to do. But when I came here, I fell in love with the liberal arts system. I started to explore different areas and different subject matter. And then I ended up getting degrees in economics, business. I also got a minor in math, and I did a whole bunch of work in physics and material science. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. Graduated in '93. And then I had admissions to grad school. I wanted to get a Ph.D. in robotics at the time. So I had everything, had the admission, had funding. But I also noticed that there was something called the Y2K bubble that was approaching at the time. People were really afraid of the Y2K bug, the year 2000, when we would now need 4-digit years as opposed to 2-digit. So I saw that as a great opportunity. And so I put grad school on hold, and I went into industry. The thing is, industry was just awesome. So just kept on deferring it. And then in '98, we started our own company. It was a software development company that soon branched out to be a science and technology company. So it was much broader than just computer science. And everything was going great. In 2006, 7, we kind of hit this recessionary time period. And we see a lot of slowing down of economic activity, not just here, but everywhere around the world. And in 2009, I was appointed to be a chair for a professionals network. And right at the same time, the state of Alabama also asked me to travel around the world to promote Alabama in terms of trade and economic growth. Now, so I was still the CEO for Elixir, and these two opportunities were going to be service opportunities. So obviously there's no money involved, and there shouldn't be. But I really enjoyed it. For 3 years, I was promoting these ideas of no walls, bridges. We want more trade, more global understanding, and it worked really well. And it's really rewarding for me. I just went to the last launch pad for IPN a couple of years ago, and we had teams from 15 different countries pitching ideas, really solid ideas. Many of them also in good positive revenue territory, great fundraising and so on. So it was very rewarding for me to see that. Similarly with the growth that Alabama has made in terms of trade, Greg is still doing a phenomenal job with the Department of Commerce. So it was awesome. It was just one problem. Around the world, wherever we went, oh, by the way, we are now in 22 different countries with IPN. So it's again, really heartwarming. But wherever I went, I saw that the devastation of cancer was simply heartbreaking. And it was much worse in low middle income countries and resource poor settings than elsewhere. So I figured, hey, listen, if we're that smart, we should be able to do something about this, right? The only problem was that I had no background in biology or medicine or any of that. So I decided to go back to school, and I enrolled at UAB for a PhD in nanomedicine. Filed for my first patent in 2015 because I structured the PhD, Setu's here as well. I structured the PhD such that the first half was focused on disease models, and the second half was on treatment delivery systems. So 2015, we filed our first patent. I got my master's also in 2015, and then got my PhD in April of 2018. And then in May of 2018, we started the company, Surflux, which stands for Cancer Microfluidics. If you notice the U is backwards, that's micro. And incidentally, the same month, Coe College invited me to speak at the commencement, and they conferred an honorary Doctor of Liberal Arts on me. So please feel free to call me Doctor. All right. So that's kind of my journey as to how I get here. And then I'm going to go there very briefly, give you an overview of what we're doing with Surflux, and then we'll go ahead and look at the road ahead. This is one of my principal philosophies. I think that Rutherford says it best. If you can't explain your physics or your biology or whatever to a bartender or just about anybody, then the problem is not with them, the problem is with you. You just don't understand it well enough. And so I'm going to go ahead and try, even with this presentation, I'm going to try to keep it such that we're going to leave all the jargon and the details out. We're going to focus on the value proposition and the problem that we're trying to solve. So, Surflux, we are simply going to match tumors with treatments. That is the bottom line of what we're doing. I think many of us are painfully aware of this problem. Everyone in this room, everybody watching us from elsewhere, and everybody who will watch this recording is going to come face to face with cancer, either as patient or as caregiver. Okay, and that's not the worst part. 3 out of 4 patients receive ineffective treatments the first time, and sometimes even second and third line treatments are ineffective. And that is because cancer is personal. And what I mean by that is that it grows and develops differently in different people. Even within the same tumor, there is considerable heterogeneity. So you would have some good factions, or I call them the stupid factions. They're simply growing, they just don't know what they're doing. And then you've got the real invasive species. So you've got multiple factions in the tumor. However, Whoops, this has a timer, doesn't it? However, our current approach to treating cancer is looking at the components. So this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, the story where you look at the elephant just in terms of, if you're blindfolded and you look at the elephant and you look at the different parts, you're going to come up with a very different idea or understanding of what an elephant is. And unfortunately, that's what we're doing today. And I'm generalizing with cancer treatment. We're going down into the narrower and narrower realm, when instead we should be looking at the tumor as a whole. So what is missing in the market today is a way to match the treatments to the specific tumors before treatment begins. And that's where we come in. So we're going to make two simple changes. Nothing rocket science, nothing too complicated. Two simple changes to the current approach. One, so instead of testing treatments one at a time inside the patients for months, we're going to check them all at once and outside the patient. So we can identify the best treatment for each individual patient before treatment begins. Okay? So we like to call this our tumor tic-tac-toe. And essentially, we will be using a piece of a tumor biopsy, which is done as part of standard procedure. And we will evaluate potential treatment. These are FDA-approved treatments, obviously, against that piece of tumor tissue to identify A, which ones will not work, and B, of the ones that work, which ones might have a better chance with that specific patient for the specific tumor than others. And then the physicians and the clinical team can decide what is best given that output, given the functional status of the patient and so on, which treatment to use from there. And I think I mentioned this a little earlier as well. The global impact of cancer is 2.5 trillion, and this is every year. And the slice of that impact that we are trying to address is on the right-hand side. It's about $70 billion, and this is in the United States alone. Okay? And our goal is very simple. We simply want to reduce the pain, the time, the cost of cancer treatment. And we want to make sure that people can live until they die. Okay, so that's our goal. We want for people to be able to, instead of dying from cancer, to be able to live with cancer and have a good quality of life. That's our goal. And compared to current technologies, of course, and even emerging technologies, we are faster, cheaper, and better. But even Iron Man cannot defeat Thanos alone. And we recognize that. We recognize the role of the dominant treatment modality today, which is chemotherapy, represented here by Hulk. On the other hand, so it's really good, but it's indiscriminate. On the other hand, you've got WASP with molecular profiling. Radiation therapy is there, surgical oncology, targeted therapy, and then of course, represented with Marvel over there is the hope and the courage of patients. And what we see our role is to be able to bring all these together to fight the multi-headed beast that is cancer. Okay, and we're going to touch upon some of these things even later. So, as I mentioned, can't do anything alone. And if you think that you are capable of doing everything by yourself, then at best you're delusional. But anyway, so we have an excellent leadership team. Dr. Johnson and Chris, longtime friends, and really very qualified and talented in many different areas. And as you can see, we have a pretty diversified team over here. And then we have complemented that with a board of advisors that brings together world-renowned experts in oncology, drug discovery, medical devices, and even aspects of regulatory compliance and corporate law and so on and so forth. These are extremely important variables that I think you need to consider when you're looking to, particularly if you're looking to do innovation and new knowledge-driven startups. Okay. Now their commitment has already paid off. We have established a very strong network of channels and partners, as shown over here, and we're growing this. We have been able to achieve a lot of ground already. We have earned considerable honors and awards, but this is biotech and this is health sciences, which means the road is very long, and before we can actually, and I joke with a lot of my information technology colleagues, right? I am so jealous of them because they can just pull out an app and say, hey, look, this is what I did. I got 100 users today. I got 200. I can get 200 next week. In health sciences, particularly in the life sciences side, we can't do that because we just can't go ahead and test this out on just about anybody, on 100 people or 200 people. There's a long process and it's a good process. I think this is a process that's very important. And we recognize that. This is the kind of mindset that is important to have before you go into an area like this. And I think we can touch upon some of these things in Q&A as well. So why would anybody want to do this, right? Why would I want to give up all of the fun stuff that I have? I have so many options to go have fun. Why am I and the team giving up all of our time and resources by investing our own money? We're doing all of this stuff in this venture, and we know that we are going to be bleeding money. We're going to be hemorrhaging money the next 5 years. Why? Why should we do that, right? Because think about it. What would you like to invest your time, your money, and your knowledge in? Can you hear me? Or?
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Sure.
On the previous slide, you had the second from the top, grants and funding applications.
Yeah.
What kind of grants and funding applications are you talking about? Academic or SBIRs or CTRs?
It will have to be SBIR and CTRs, but it can also be other kinds. So there could be foundation grants. There could be a whole bunch. Good question. Thank you. So what would we rather be spending our time on? What would we rather be spending our money on? If you were to look at investment goals, and this is our philosophy, and I believe many would agree with us, that if I have $1 to invest, I would much rather invest it in an invention that can be used to create innovations that would transform people's lives. Of course, it would make me a lot of income because that is part of investing, right? You want to be able to have income, but also an impact that can change society for generations to come. And the wheel is a classic example of that. Of course, the ROI for a wheel is more than 1,000 years. And with health sciences innovation, you could achieve the same 4 I's in a very short time frame. The ROI is 5 years or somewhere around there, instead of having to wait 1,000 years for making an impact. So this is the reason, this is the motivation that we have for investing our time, our money, and our resources in innovation and new knowledge-driven startups in the life sciences segment. So I think we've covered the past, we've covered the present. Now let's look at the future. I don't think anybody would disagree that the pace of knowledge today is unprecedented. And I think that this line from Through the Looking Glass sums it up very well. You have to run as fast as you can just to stay where you are. And if you want to go somewhere, you have to run at least twice as fast. Right? And if you want hard data for it, if you look at the printing press, and I think Satya from Microsoft mentioned this, that before the press, there were 30,000 books. 50 years after the printing press, there are 12 million books. So, and during that time frame, or actually until the 1900s, we were doubling knowledge every 100 years. When I was an undergrad, we were doubling knowledge every 25 years. And now it's within a matter of months. We're doubling knowledge. So even as an undergraduate actually goes to school for the first day, by the time they graduate, most of what they've learned is now obsolete. So the pace of knowledge is just incredible. What good does all this knowledge do, right? So the purpose of knowledge, acquisition of knowledge, there's a twin purpose. One is to better understand the fabric of existence, right? So if you have a universe, a multiverse, whatever, what is it? Who are we? And what is this context within which we are living? So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect, which is extremely important, equally important, is to use that new knowledge to serve others. Otherwise, it would be entirely imbalanced, skewed. But unfortunately, this is what is happening today. I'll go back to India again. There was a story that is related. So growing up in India, the advantage is you get to hear a lot of stories. One of the stories is about a person who has this massive chest of treasure and gold pieces and so on and so forth. And he's extremely infatuated with it. He's just in love with his treasure. The problem is that he doesn't want to spend any of it. So what he does, because he doesn't want to lose any of it, so he goes to a remote place, finds a nice little area, digs a hole, puts the treasure in there, covers it up. And on a regular basis, he would go to that site, uncover it, look at it, feel really good about it, put it right back, and cover it up. Well, one day he goes to the same site, digs it up, keeps on digging, keeps on digging. There is no treasure chest. It's gone. It's stolen. He was devastated. And he was just like in shock, crying, wailing. So one of his wise friends comes up to him with a box about the same size, and it was just as heavy. You can imagine this guy's excitement. He says, "You found it." He runs over there, he grabs the box, opens the box, and it's full of rocks. And his friend tells him that, "Go bury this in that hole. It'll do you just the same good as the treasure did, because you never used it. Just look at it, dig it out, put it back in." And this sadly is the case with university labs today. We do a phenomenal job, of discovery, of inventions. But, we simply we admire it, we enjoy it, and we put it right back. Instead of unleashing that in the service of humanity, in the service of others. So for people who are at academic institutions doing research, creating new knowledge, new inventions, it is not an optional activity anymore. It is our responsibility that we take this and use it to serve others. Now, how do we do it? So I know that we do I-Core, we do CCTS, we do all these things, but based on my observation, I believe there's a framework that needs to be put in place for us to effectively translate ideas from labs to life, from inventions to innovations that will serve others in bringing true value. Now, there are two components to this, and I like to use a pass-fail model. The P, or the parameters, are systemic, or as my wife, who is a sociologist, would say, it is structure. And then the F's are agency. So the 6 parameters are people, places, platforms, partners, propulsion, and policy. And these are structure. And using that, we have 3 factors of agency called fuel, fire, and flight. Of course, they have their counterparts: refuel, misfire, and falter. And I think we just need to be used to that. I think you should be totally fine with this, because it's just the pattern that we get used to. Now, let me go ahead and quickly review the parameters. Then we'll talk a little bit about the factors and then examine the road ahead. So first parameter is people. You have to have mechanisms in place to draw people to where you are, to grow them where they are. So for instance, programs like the I-Core program, programs like Entrepreneurship, research institutions where you are able to put both grad students, undergrad students in meaningful research projects. But the third aspect, which is very important, is to be able to bring all these people together so that they can interact. And these people, there has to be intellectual diversity and also a growth mindset. So this as policymakers, or as people who are responsible for economic development, infrastructure, this is one of the most significant parameters that we must be focused on, is people. Because without people, we're not going to really make any breakthroughs. We're not going to get anywhere. So this is where it is mind over matter, is people. The second is matter over mind. Okay, you could have the best people, but if they don't have places to operate, then it's like what happens with life. Even the startup of life needed a place to basically happen. Otherwise, it would have faltered and failed. Whether you are a subscriber of the primordial soup theory or the geothermal vents in the ocean bed, either case, you have all the elements, you have the right components. If they don't have a place to come together, life doesn't happen. Okay, and some of the places that we would need in our region are co-working spaces. That is only for the initial aspects, because when you're looking at either industrial or life sciences, you need more dedicated spaces like dedicated incubators, what I call ink pods, biotech parks, and so on and so forth. And we'll come back to incubators in a minute, and why they have to be dedicated. Now, the argument that I often hear from people is, why do we need places? Now we've got these wonderful online networks. People can just connect. And to that, again, I would like to relay another story. So I don't know how many of you are aware of Birbal and Akbar. Birbal is apparently the wisest courtier in Akbar's court. And Akbar one day, it's a really cold day, maybe it was 70 degrees because you're talking India. It was a really cold day in December, and Akbar and Birbal are sitting by a pool. And Akbar says, you know what? I would give a bag of gold or something like that to anybody who could stand in that pond in this freezing cold for the whole night. So they make this announcement. One poor chap says, okay, I'll do it. I need investment for my startup. So I'll come and stand in the pool for one night. You give me that bag of gold. So he goes in, he does that. Next morning, he comes to collect the gold. And Akbar says, sure, but tell me, how were you able to do it? We were all shivering. How did you do it? So the guy goes, you know, there was a lamp that I could see. And I just kept imagining the lamp. And that's how I derived warmth. So Akbar said, you cheated, because you were not feeling the same cold that we were feeling, because a lamp provided you warmth. So get out of here. You don't get that money that I promised. So Birbal's there, and Birbal, of course, says it's unjust, but he doesn't say anything at the time because he has to find the right opportunity. A few days later, he invites Akbar to dinner. And Akbar says, great, I'll be there. So Akbar comes to dinner, and guess what? No food is coming out. So he's sitting over there for 30 minutes. An hour goes by, 2 hours. He's getting upset now. He says, Birbal, where's the food? He says, it's cooking. It's been cooking. So he's very patient, but still no food. So he says, show me what in the world is going on. It cannot take this long to cook food. So sure, Birbal takes him to the backyard where he's got this kind of an arrangement where the pot is so far away from the flame, it's not boiling at all. And so Akbar says, you see, that's your problem. It's got to be close to the flame for it to heat up. Otherwise, it can't get warm. And Birbal says, exactly. This is why that guy deserves that bag of gold, because just by imagining the flame or being that distance away is not going to make him feel warm. You have to be able to bring that in contact. So we need physical places. We need atoms, not just bits, if we are to have ink-driven startups. And then the idea about the incubators, the reason why you want them to be dedicated in life sciences, the health sciences, is partially because of the long runways that we've got, which could lead to the idea of like a resource curse. So we have a very nice incubator here in the city of Birmingham. It's very successful. But that success itself becomes a sort of a resource curse, because there is a certain profile of companies that are going to have very quick, immediate outcomes, whether it's in terms of eyeballs, users, downloads, revenue, whatever. When you're in that space, you're moving ahead very quickly. And so all the attention and focus is on those kinds of companies. And biotech or health sciences companies that could take a while become step children. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is by co-locating companies that are in the innovation space, whether it's engineering, health sciences, whatever, that do recognize that there are specialized industrial regulatory aspects, there's a lot of good knowledge sharing that can happen, and also idea percolation. So there are multiple benefits of actually having incubators that are dedicated to longer term industrial health science innovation type spaces. Okay. Next comes platform. So now I just dished on bits, but now I'm going to say bits are important, because just as what we're doing today over here would not be possible if it had to be all in one place. So bits are extremely important. These platforms, we thank you for doing these. Thank you all for organizing this. I think we need more of this, that for us to be able to make inroads into this area, and of course, grand rounds. Next P is partners. So the odds of success go up considerably if you are proximal to your end users or strong customers, professional services. I talked about good manufacturing. I don't know if I did or not, but good manufacturing practices, things like that. Research organizations, to have influencers, non-governmental organizations that are in that space. The closer you are to them, the higher the chance of success. So it's important to have a nice ecosystem of partners around. Propulsion. And this is where the investment comes in, the financial component. There are several vehicles. I think you touched upon that a little earlier. Oftentimes when you look at startups or the mechanisms to fund startups, you will see the common things like banks, competitions, angels, VCs, friends, families, fools. But when you're doing health sciences or other innovation-driven startups, you also have access to grants. And whereas you could have SBIR, SCTR style grants, you could have foundation grants, and you could technically also use academic grants. But there's got to be a different mechanism for it. So there are more avenues for getting fuel, essentially, for your startup. And finally, policy. There has to be appropriate policy, there has to be appropriate incentives that are provided, a proper mindset, both in terms of local investors and policymakers, to understand the longer runway that's involved in some of these startups. Okay, so I think we've gone through all the structural parameters. In terms of the agency factors, I think I mentioned that fuel is both money and talent. I don't know if I use it. So money is extremely important, but so is talent. And you will have multiple cycles of refueling. So whether you get one grant, you'll need more because you will hemorrhage a lot of money, as we are. Fire is once you start using the talent and the financial resources judiciously, and then you're now able to start operations and you are trying to get off that runway and catch flight. Flight is when you reach escape velocity and you're able to soar. And at that point, you are either looking to expand rapidly, or most likely you're looking to exit. So you can come right back in this cycle and start something new. Okay? So this is a cycle that continues. Misfire, that's okay. I mean, you might think you're going down a certain path, may not work. It's okay. You take your learnings and you move. Either you can pivot, or you may need to wind down, or whatever the case may be, but you go right back and you start up with something new. Okay, there has to be a certain resilience if you are going to be playing in this space. You got to understand that there is a cycle. All right, I think Lydia asked me to go ahead and include this little piece in here, so I'm going to give you a quick tip, and I think I mentioned this earlier too. Teams are extremely important. No matter how much of a genius you are, even if you're a really stable genius, whatever that means, you will need appropriate teams, people who are qualified, who are smarter than you are. It's good to surround yourself with them and to listen to them and to work with them. In a innovation-driven startup space, it's even more important to have a backup. I don't know how many of you would like to fly on a single-engine plane. I myself prefer at least two. But that's one aspect, is backup. Power up. You imagine what this guy is going through. If he had a little bit of help, I guess he could do a lot better. And then startups, as I mentioned earlier, is a bumpy ride. And to have somebody there with you to be able to pick you up when you're down, or to be able to celebrate with you, I think it is very, very valuable. You cannot put that value down in terms of money, because that's totally invaluable. And then finally, it can get very lonely, and you could get tunnel vision. So having a team is extremely important. Now, some people might argue that I am a know-it-all, I am the best. I don't really need anybody. In fact, the argument that I hear is people say, if I get somebody on, that I have to waste too much of my time trying to explain to them what needs to happen and so on and so forth. Well, to them, I would like to talk to about Ricardo's principle of comparative advantage. So even if you're the best at everything, which is not possible, but let's just say even if you're the best at everything, even then, it makes more sense for you to spend your time on things that you're better at, even compared to yourself, than others. Okay, because if you are really good at underwater basket weaving, and you're also really good at singing, but let's just say you're better at basket weaving, you should spend your time underwater basket weaving. Let somebody else do the singing. Okay, so that's Ricardo's comparative advantage. Anyway, why does all this matter, right? Why should we spend our afternoon? I think I talked about this briefly earlier. As we look ahead, we are growing at a clip of about 100,000 people, right? The population is growing. What that means is there's going to be increased demand on energy, food, water, health. I think we're doing really well in terms of alleviating poverty. We've made considerable progress. However, if we leave these decisions, as we look ahead to short-term greedy forces, then it'll become unsustainable with population growth and so on. But on the other hand, if we use a model where we're using intelligent forces, where we understand a triple bottom line, for instance, where we understand the social costs, and we are able to truly extend the production possibilities frontier so that we're enlarging the pie instead of simply trying to chop the pie up in smaller pieces, I think we would be on a much better path forward. And this is the path that I prefer, is through impact investments, using innovation-driven enterprises that can move society forward, that can get ahead of population expansion, that can get ahead of our demands for clean energy, food security, water security, even air. So this is where everybody, I believe, who is doing academic research, who has all these resources, it's not just a hobby for us. It's not an elective. It is our responsibility to be able to drive this path forward. So let's go save the world. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions, but this is how I answer questions. Okay, so do we have anybody? How do we know?
So, any questions from our partners?
They're all muted.
Yeah.
Just unmute.
How do we have to unmute from here?
No, they should be able to unmute if they have a question. They can take it off mute.
They just
I
click
see.
their
I think somebody's walking up.
microphone. You guys
Can I
have
go?
any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Dr. Karim, thank you so much. Great talk. Nice philosophy. I would personally like a little bit more information about your technology in terms of that you have a possibility to match drugs with tumor and so forth. Can you sort of, not that I want to steal your ideas, but I want to see the path that you actually went, and how far are you ahead, and where are you now, and are you making income in terms of selling the kits, or we like to have a little bit of information in that aspect rather than rallying us to make up a company, bring the knowledge from the lab to the patent office, and so forth. Now, those stuff are great, but I like to know a little bit more about the details of your company's success and where are you now, and potential for collaboration and that type of thing.
Okay, so I think that some of the points that you mentioned are extremely relevant, and I think that in terms of potential for collaboration, I would love to connect with you offline as well to see how we can connect. Because as I mentioned earlier, anybody who thinks they can do everything by themselves is delusional, and so we're looking for any kind of collaboration. We're already collaborating with other groups as well. Now, in terms of our technology, it is based on microfluidics. It is I don't know how much you already know in terms of the clinical setting for solid tumors. We are focused on solid tumors, and specifically we're looking currently at 5 subtypes, which is breast, ovarian, colorectal, lung, and pancreatic. And in these cases, especially the solid tumor where we are planning to come in, typically a biopsy is done, and then from the biopsy a histopathology profile is secured, and then the rest of the tissue, there's still a lot of tissue left, and that's the tissue that we intend to use in our microfluidic platform. And it's not just a single, what I like to call it, Tupperware. So it's not just a Tupperware, but it's a solution stack that we actually look at from multiple different aspects to be able to come up with this. Now, we are very early in that stage. As I mentioned, I think in one of my slides, we are at least 3 to 4 years away from seeing any revenue, any operating revenue. So we do have revenue in terms of grants and such, but in terms of operating revenue, we were still a while away. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very good process. Even though some of this does not directly apply to our company, we're self-imposing this because we want to make sure that there's no voodoo here. There's no no smoke and mirrors. We want to make sure that we go through everything and that it's fully transparent. So that's basically what we're working on. We're self-imposing this timeline.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
So Karim, your pathway is very different, where you came from industry and went back to become a researcher.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, and you obviously have networked with a lot of researchers, academic researchers, trainees. What kind of advice, do you see a difference in mindset?
Right. So I think that now there are, whenever you generalize, you're essentially, you're basically committing a sin, essentially, because you're going to leave out a lot of interesting detail. But I'm going to generalize a little, just to answer this question, right? So the idea in academic research is, we have a hypothesis or a certain aspect that we kind of fall in love with, and then we keep traveling down that path. And then we get so enamored of it that we say, this is just, if I just do this alone, people will just clamor for it. But that's not really true. If that were true, people will be clamoring for broccoli instead of chocolate. Broccoli is much better for you than chocolate, right? But people don't do that. People still smoke cigarettes, even though we know what it does, right? So I think in the academic research environment, we're saying, well, all right, I got this. Why in the world will nobody buy this, right? Why would they not do this? This makes sense. Well, it makes sense because you've been doing this for 10 years or 12 years and you understand it better than anybody else does. But the goal then should be that if you have found something that is so meaningful that you should want to share it, but the way to share it is to be able to communicate it in a language that is appropriate for everybody else. I'm not saying you dumb it down. In fact, that's the opposite, because then it's disrespectful. You want to be able to simplify it in conversation for a generalist as opposed to a specialist. And that's basically where you need to be. So if you can make that transition, then that's good. Now, that is not enough. Like I mentioned, you need a strong team with you, because if you don't have the mindset, the skill sets are entirely different. Fundraising mindset outside of the grants sphere, completely different from what we have in academic grants. So you have to have that kind of a broad perspective. And I think that the fastest way to do that is to have a team, but not just a team as a token, but a team that you truly respect and that you would listen to in many areas. In fact, I seek counsel all the time from my team, because that is just the way, even though I may know more of this, I may have done this for 5-6 years, doesn't matter. I have to have proper counsel from my colleagues so that I can do the best job of translating this into a real life application. So that's basically the advice I would give. I think that everybody is doing, I even mentioned that it's a treasure. We have a treasure trove in university labs. They are simply graveyards of ideas, because everybody falls in love with them. They only want to keep it, not intentionally, but they only want to keep it to themselves so they can keep enjoying it. And also the other part is to translate that treasure, that it's more consumable, it's more work, I think. So that's where you kind of have to get that commitment, saying, you know what, I have all the resources. I have everything. I have the knowledge. I have it. If I don't do this to save lives or to bring clean water or clean energy, then it's a criminal offense on my part, because now I am keeping these wonderful resources from other people. So I think if you can just switch the mindset to saying, okay, now I'm acquiring knowledge, now I'm going to serve others because I have to, because I'm the only one who can. Once you do that, I think it makes it easier. Any other questions?
I have another question.
Oh, sure.
So what keeps you up at night? What are you afraid of is going to derail you? Is it the technology, the financing, losing people on your team? I know you worry about everything, but
Yes. Yes, I think that all of that matters. I think doesn't necessarily keep me up at night because I do need a good night's rest. But I think that things that are on top of mind in terms of what would be success within this context. Because like I said, even if you fail, falter, you simply go back in the cycle and you start up with a different pathway. But I understand. So the areas of concern for us right now is to make sure that we can refine and scale this. That's a very big concern. We need to be able to make sure that that can happen. In terms of fundraising, sure, that's a problem. In terms of being able to reach the market, sure, that's an issue. But right now, currently, what's most important to me is to be able to make sure that we can refine and scale. If I can't refine and scale, none of the other things will matter. So to me, that's like top of mind right now. Doesn't mean that the other stuff does not matter. Okay. And I don't know if you know this or not, but we just set up a whole new lab. And my God, it's such a pain to do all that. But you've got to go through that. And once it's set up, and that's the reason why I think if we have dedicated incubators, I think that would take all this friction out of being able to take ideas from lab to life. So, but that's a big concern right now. Now, what would be really good, which would still be which would not be a good outcome for our company, but that's the outcome that I would love, is if somehow we just crush cancer. That it just so we don't really need to even exist. I think that would be a good problem to have.
questions from our partners? All right, well, thank you, Karim.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.